You got to have passion and believe in what you're doing, right? So be passionate about the business you're building and be prepared to just bullet through, because it will always cost more, take longer, be more painful than you can imagine. But at the same time, you have to have a sense of rationality, right? As Mark Twain once said, if 3 people tell you you're drunk, go and lie down anyway. So you got to have this very interesting thing about passion and commitment on the one hand, but pragmatism on the other hand.
Today we're joined by David Rose. He's a legendary
David
S. Rose. Yes, we talked about this. David S. Rose, because there's another David L. Rose. Yes. David S. Rose, who has like the 5th generation of like entrepreneurs. But also he's like you started in real estate. You then started, building your own thing. You went through like the dot-com bubble, and then you started venture investing, and then now you're building your second startup, which is USREM. So we'll talk about all of that. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So tell us a bit more about like how you started. So your origin story of like when you caught the entrepreneurial bug.
So I am actually a 5th generation entrepreneur.
Yes.
So I come by it naturally.
Yeah.
There is a large genetic component to entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
So I started inventing things when I was a child. For my 6th birthday, my father gave me a book to record my inventions in. I started my first company when I was about 10 or 12, Rose Productions, a multimedia organization.
Yes.
I was doing graphic design and everything from ID cards and flyers and so on, audiovisual production when I was in high school. By the time I was a senior in high school, I had an after-school film program that I was running.
Yeah.
And when I got to college, my first day at college, I realized that our dorm rooms back then had fireplaces, actually working fireplaces, but there was no firewood. So I figured, well, I got to solve that problem.
Yeah.
So I ordered a quart of firewood on the spot and started selling firewood to my roommates and to everybody in my dorm. And so by the time I finished my first day of college, I had sold out a quart of firewood and had stocked firewood supply for the rest of my year.
No way.
And so I then kept doing things during college. I ran the print shop for the college, which became my avocation. Was working on trying to get space in the space shuttle with NASA, to the point where the Yale Daily News wrote an article on me saying, when academics aren't enough, about this weird person who was like doing business stuff out of school. Because back then there were no programs, no entrepreneurship programs, no clubs, no associations, no mentorship things. It was not at all what it is today. So no university at all had anything with the word entrepreneurship back in those days. So I was a sort of weird kind of a thing. And all of my friends were, of course, pre-med and pre-law and pre-consulting and whatever. And so I'm getting ready to graduate, and I had, they all wanted to go off to med school. I had no clue what I was going to do. So I was debating between going to work for Disney World as an Imagineer and design rides for Disney World, which I thought would be very cool, or get a degree in typography in Florence, because my avocation was the history of the printed word and the history of the book. And so as I was trying to debate between those, out of the blue, I got offered a job by Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was formerly a New York senior senator, ambassador to the UN, ambassador to India. He was an extraordinary statesman here.
The train station.
And the train station is named after him, Moynihan Hall. He was very involved in that. And so he offered me out of the blue a job as his urban affairs expert, because that was my undergraduate degree. So I said, oh, that sounds good. So I sent my first job out of college was working in politics for the senator, first as his urban affairs expert, and then eventually running his whole office here in New York City, which was an enormous amount of fun for a 21-year-old kid, conducting congressional investigations and sitting on boards with the mayor and writing op-eds for the Times and so on and so forth. And I realized after a couple of years that it was an enormous amount of fun, and I'd be stuck there for life, because it was just, being attached around politics can be very, very interesting. But at heart, I was a private sector entrepreneurial type with this flowing through my veins. So I reluctantly left Moynihan, came up to Columbia and got my MBA in real estate finance at Columbia while working for my family business. And so to fast forward a little bit, I was named one of the finalists for the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year Award in the dot-com boom in the 1990s. My father won it in 2002. My father was E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year in 2002
Yeah.
in real estate. So
You were earlier than him.
but he is now 96,
Yeah.
and he is more active than I am. So
Yeah.
come from a very entrepreneurial family, and the family business was in real estate, and so I joined the family business. It's been a decade in real estate development, cycling through all aspects of real estate. But I am old enough, so I had come of age and got out of the college just when personal computers were starting. So,
Yes.
I mean, I knew, I've met Steve Jobs in person. I knew all these early guys, and I got my first Apple II back in 1979 or thereabouts, 78, 79. And so, of course, if you start a job and you want to use all the appropriate tools, today the equivalent would be AI, right? Anybody who's doing any kind of entry-level job is going to be using AI to figure something out. So I figured, well, good, because of course you use a computer. So I was in real estate, so I was using my Apple II to do spreadsheets, because people before were writing things out, typing things on spreadsheets.
Yes.
The spreadsheet was actually invented by friends of mine, VisiCalc, Dan Brooklyn and Bob Frankston. Bob Frankston and Dan Brooklyn developed VisiCalc, which was the first spreadsheet. And so we were among the very first people to use computer spreadsheets for real estate pro formas. And so anyway, I have the dubious distinction of having invented the field of prop tech. So I was the first prop tech guy. This is now 1980, 1981. So we created the first computerized real estate sales office, the first construction punch list software, the first multiple listing service for New York City. We were the first people to build condominiums that came with a computer in every apartment. And then since I had a building full of computers, I created the first location-based building social network people are building, the first construction progress photos using webcams, all these firsts in applying technology to real estate, which is very lonely because nobody else was doing it. But in any event,
counterintuitively, isn't that like a great opportunity? Because you're going in and you're like, look, I have this thing that makes everything
it was
faster.
great, except that we were doing this for our own stuff. I was in real estate, so I actually designed this whole real estate sales office, a sales gallery that you would now have for a typical condo. But every broker had a computer built into their desk, and it would let you do your financial analysis and walk you through a little floor plan and show you the views and all that kind of stuff, which is way ahead of its time. But so I was doing that in real estate, and then on the side, being an entrepreneurial type, I had various other activities and side gigs that I was doing. I had been very involved in the online world of the sort of, PC. Before there was an online world, there were things called online services like CompuServe and AOL. Before AOL, there was CompuServe. Before CompuServe, there was The Source. These were in the early 1980s and mid 1980s. So on CompuServe, there were forums for people who were interested in various computers, and I was involved in the Macintosh forums. And so I became sort of the social coordinator and system administrator for the Mac forums on CompuServe. And then when the Mac came out in 1984, by 85 or 86, they had the first Macworld trade show, which was back then. Silicon Valley wasn't quite what it was, so it was actually in Boston, which was a very tech area. So Macworld started in Boston, didn't move to Silicon Valley for several years after that. So every summer in Boston, they had this the show. And the first time I went, there were these sort of small booths around the edges of the show. Apple had Adobe had big ones in the middle, and these small little booths, what we would now call startups, but the term wasn't being applied to those kind of small companies back then. I knew all those guys because they were all on these tiny little online services that we were just starting. So I knew everybody who was there. And it turned out that they were getting invited to the good parties because they were exhibitors. And I wasn't an exhibitor, so I didn't get to go to the good parties. So I said, well, we have to change that. So for the next year, the next trade show, this is probably in 88, I said, okay, I'm going to be an exhibitor too. So I got a booth at the trade show from Mitch Hall Associates for Macworld Trade Show. Now I had a booth. I had to put something in the booth. So I said, okay, what am I going to put in? I got to have a product. So in a remainder catalogs before there were websites, there were paper catalogs. And if you had overstock of something, there were, it would show up in these catalogs and you could order it. I found a catalog which had this digital watch that Seiko had created that had a little chip in it. It had 2K of RAM. And it had a little port to connect to your computer. The idea being that you could download alarms and stuff for your computers and reminders and so on. So I said, that's pretty cool. You could enter things in there and send it up to the computer. So the So I got all the remaining units they had. They had like 12 units. And since I knew everybody who was in this tiny little computer industry at that point, I got my friends together and I created a product called the Wrist Mac. I figured for my Mac computer, we would plug it into the Mac. So the hardware was designed by Dennis Brothers, who did BitHack software, and the manual was written by Neil Shapiro, who was the editor of Mac User Magazine, and the software was done by Richard Reich, who wrote the HP12C calculator. So we put together this little team, and I got these units and showed it off at the first Macworld trade show, and it was a bit of a big hit. And so the first person to come along and buy one, put down $200 to buy one, was Bill Atkinson, who was the guy who wrote Mac Paint and was one of the architects of the Mac. And then the second guy who came along to buy one was a guy named Fred Smith, who was an entrepreneur who had actually founded Federal Express, FedEx. So I came away from this show saying, there might actually be, I might actually, in addition to going to good parties, have a product that people might want. So I, went to Seiko and said, hey, you got any more of these, watches? They said, oh, no, it didn't sell because it had been a disastrous product in the US. Their advertising showed a couple in bed with a wire connecting their watches. You can exchange data with bad thing. But in any event, they said no. So we had a whole bunch of them. We sent them back to Japan to be crushed under bulldozers to avoid American dumping regulations. So I said, hey, turn the boat around, send them back here because I think I want to buy them for you in pennies on the dollar. So I did. I got a whole container full of these different color watches and stuff. And then we did more software and fancied it up and created the Wrist Mac. So the Wrist Mac, my first product, tech product, was this digital watch that plugged into your Mac and uploaded and downloaded data from your Mac.
So it's like a floppy disk, but
no, it was a watch, a physical watch. So 28
it's storage
years.
Device.
Oh, the storage device, it was on your Mac, so with a floppy disk, right? A little 3.5-inch floppy disk you would put in.
What does the watch do? It's
software. So the watch itself had a little 2-line display. And you could set alarms to ring. You could put notes in there, reminders, as a few buttons, and you could enter some
mini computer.
It's a very tiny. it wouldn't get any processing, but it can store some data, and then you could connect it to your Mac and upload data from your watch into.
So it syncs.
So it can sync between your computer and your watch with this little wire. And so they had multiple colors and stuff. So that was interesting. And so at that point, it turned out that was just when the concept of inter-application communication was coming along. So programs used to not be able to talk to each other. Now it's all standard, everybody APIs and interfaces. Back then, that was not the thing. And so Apple introduced something called Apple Events, which were the way that Apple Mac programs talk to each other. At the same time that Microsoft introduced DDE, Dynamic Data Exchange for Windows, so applications spoke. So I said, well, as long as I got an application, let it talk to other applications. So we published a little API spec for this, and I took out an ad in one of the computer journals and stuff, and I got all these developers who were now writing little things to tie their stuff. So, for example, you could your calendar program could download your calendar, your watch, or you could take notes for a receipt and upload it to QuickBooks for your your restaurant check or whatever it is.
QuickBooks was a thing already in 1980 plus?
Well, they were thinking of it in 88. And so, I wouldn't say it was used a whole lot, but it was sexy. It was one of the first things. It was called the Wrist Mac. We had a nice thing. And then something interesting happened. I got a call from NASA saying that on the space shuttle, there was a problem that the astronauts couldn't hear the annunciators, the alarms on the space shuttle because of all the ambient noise. And so they were thinking of flying a Mac on the space shuttle. Could they get some of these watches to give to the astronauts to use to download their alarms so they could hear them up close? I said, oh, that sounds great. So I did a deal with NASA. And so the Wrist Mac flew on STS-43, Space Shuttle Mission 43. Yes. And so now, of course, it became the Space Shuttle watch, the astronaut watch. And so now, this is back in the era of trade shows when you used to have booth babes and so on and so forth. So now our booth staff could dress in NASA jumpsuits, and we handed out freeze-dried ice cream, and we did a special space shuttle version. We had reserved our silver version, for that. So that was very cool. So I had this hit, and people thought it was really cool and ahead of its time. And then the question is, what's our next product out there? So this was when Motorola introduced the first wristwatch pager. Now, you guys are probably too young for pagers, but pagers, before there was text messaging, there were pagers or beepers. It was a little thing you put on your belt, and it would get a wireless signal, and it would beep and show you a phone number.
Yes.
And so Motorola introduced the first wristwatch pager instead of a big bulky thing in your waist that you couldn't watch. I said, oh, that'd be cool. I tell you what, we'll do a wristmac number 2. An advanced version. I will OEM the watch from Motorola, and we'll let you go wirelessly from your computer to your watch. So we figured out how to get into paging systems using software, dial-up software on your computer. And then we realized that the Motorola wristwatch pager was actually only a numeric pager. It could just do a phone number, which wasn't very helpful and big and bulky. But right about then, Motorola introduced the first text pager. It was called the Advisor. It was about this big, and it had a 2-line screen of 80 characters, and it could receive a text message. You would typically call an operator, dictate a message, and they would type it in, and it would show it somebody's thing. So we figured out the protocols to get into the paging system so you could enter it from your computer. So now I had the wireless wristmac effectively, and so that was the theory. But forget the watches. Now I actually had a pager and software that could send a wireless message to a pager. And so we used the APIs and stuff that we had developed originally for the wristmac, and then we took advantage of Apple events and DDE and everything else. And so now I can say, hey, you could turn your application wirelessly with a few lines of code just by calling us, and we'd send it to somebody's pager. And so now we got all kinds of developers who are interested in letting you know when your compiler had finished a compile or something was happening in your system or whatever. And so we now had the software that would, the first computer software that would actually run these paging things and do wireless communications and send your email wirelessly, all kinds of stuff. And so now we released that, and that was announced at a Macworld show. It's one of the first uses of Apple events. And so in Apple's keynote, they actually paged the head of Apple software from the audience who got up with the thing, and he showed his message on his pager and stuff, and that was very cool. So now we had all kinds of people who were interested in doing things, wirelessly. I joined the paging Pager Trade Association, which eventually renamed itself, became the whole mobile industries thing. Next thing I know, I find myself on the technical committee for the Paging Industries Trade Association. And they were realizing that you would soon have two-way pagers, which would mean you could do two-way wireless, but then had to tie to the internet somehow. And so they wanted a new protocol, and there was a sort of warring two factions, Motorola and the company that did the pagers, and the company that was doing the big paging systems were fighting about what the protocol should be. And so the committee looked at me and said, well, you're an independent guy, you figure it out. Okay, so that's how I became the editor of the Paging Industries Data Protocols, and helped to write the protocol for sending two-way text messages over a computer. But in any event, so at that point, I was, we had something going on here. So I left real estate, my little side gig. So I moved away from real estate.
That was all side gig.
It was all a side gig, right? And then, but now I had something that people were actually buying. And it's very interesting. So I get a call from a guy named David Corsi, at that point was editor of PC Magazine or whatever, saying, we have a conference in California called Demo, which is not currently around, but it was a very big thing back then. I never heard of it. So I said, what is that? Oh, well, we picked, 50 or 75 best products of the year, introduced them at this big conference and showcased them to the press and corporate buyers and investors and so on. So, and we think the software you have called Notify, our paging software, is great. So, okay. I said, okay, fine, I'll come out. So I go out to California after asking where California was, because I'm a New Yorker. And here we are, we demonstrate this, this whole product. And back then when you were demoed, you have a little table in addition to the main stage demo in the sort of conference area. You have a table and a desk and a little potted plant and a chair like this, and people would come over and they would look at a demo of your product. So, so I was demoing this paging software, and people come over and say, oh, that's really interesting. People like Esther Dyson, who was the first chairperson of the internet, and John Doerr of Kleiner Perkins and Ray Rothrock of Nature VCs. So they came around and they said, so really interesting product. So how much are you looking for? I said, how much, what am I looking for? And I don't know. And they said, how much money are you looking for? I said, oh. And that was when I first realized that people might actually be interested in investing in this kind of stuff. So I said, I'll get back to you on that. So came back from California, went to my father, this, entrepreneurial business type, and said, who's not at all a techie, very entrepreneurial, but not at all a techie. And I said, so I have people who are interested in investing in, this thing. My father, who, you wouldn't even understand a pager at that point. And then, oh, that's very interesting. I don't know about the technology, but the fact that they want to invest, that's a good thing. Well, why don't you check with our friend Alan, who does that kind of thing, and see what he has to say? So, our friend was a guy I'd known, much of my life, a friend of ours, a guy named Alan Patrickall, who turns out to, at that point, was running a major private equity fund called Alan Patrickall Partners, eventually became Apex, one of the biggest PE funds around. So I went to Alan and I said, hey, here's what I'm doing. And Alan said, oh, very interesting. We do giant mega deals and stuff, but I do this little thing that's called like angel investing. I'll invest in startups, and that's really interesting. So I'll invest $75,000 in your startup. So I said, oh, that's great. I'll get back to you on that. So I went back to my father and said, hey, Alan wants to invest $75,000 into this product. My father said, well, he's a very smart guy. That's very impressive. But why don't you get a second opinion? I said, okay, from who? He said, well, got another friend over here, Lionel. Go talk to, see what Lionel has to say. Okay, fine. So I go to Lionel. Well, Lionel turns out to be Lionel Pincus, the head of Warburg Pincus, the largest private equity venture fund at that point. Very wonderful, courtly older gentleman, since passed away. And I showed him my stuff, and he said, oh, it was very interesting. So what do my guys say about it? I said, I don't know. Who are your guys, and what do they say? He said, I thought you were here to pitch me. I said, okay, I'm here to pitch you. So make a very, very long story short, I did my first Series A from Warburg Pincus. I'm the only person to ever raise VC without realizing I was raising VC. I did my first Series A from Warburg Pincus in 1991. They invested with the goal of seeing if they could turn a phenom into a company. And so with that, I then left real estate full time, went into the tech thing, and started the company, which at that point was, I had to have a name. And the first name I had chosen was Ex Machina, EX space MACHINA, from the Latin. Deus Ex Machina. It was a multiple pun in 3 languages, God out of the machine, formerly out of the Mac, and so I had to. My mother insisted that I put on the back of our business cards a description of what the hell the name meant and how you could pronounce it, and so on and so forth. But in any event, so we did that, and we started. We did the software from our first client was Motorola. We did the software for their pager. They included the pager. Then we did the software for many of the major paging companies. And then along comes the Olympics in 1996 in Atlanta, and Bell South, which owned the second biggest biggest paging company, was the wireless, but was the sponsor for the Olympics, and so they commissioned us to do the wireless press room. We would send all of the scores from all of the things to the journalists' computers and plug right in, kind of stuff. And so we built that whole system. And then at the last minute, they gave up their sponsorship and sold it to somebody else they kept the sponsorship, but they sold the company to another Motivate in New Jersey, who said, well, we're not in Atlanta, we're not Bell South, so we're not going to sponsor pay anymore for this thing. So they said, you keep the software. So they paid $1 million, millions of bucks for us to build this whole thing. But so we kept that. It's a really cool system. And so now I had, more technology and stuff. But on the horizon, so here we had dial-up software that was sending messages to and from these pagers. And then eventually, when you had the first of the PCS phones, the first smartphones, it would send a text messaging to them. So that was great, until the internet came along, and the internet dumped like a giant shark in Jaws, dump, coming down, because dial-up, it was going to kill dial-up software. So if we have dial-up software, what do you do? So we said, okay, how do we take the internet and wireless messaging and computers? So we said, okay, great. So we'll actually do wireless communications for computers. We'll do the first wireless networking long-term. So we ended up licensing the paging chipset from Motorola. Worked with TSI, and we came up with a new product that would be a plug-in to your serial port on your computer that would allow you to receive data, both text and data, wirelessly over paging networks. And so we started developing this thing and showed this under NDA to various people. And people thought this was amazingly cool. So under NDA, we ended up raising a lot more money from some big, interesting players, industry players. And we licensed this technology to Hewlett Packard and Compaq and NEC and Global Village and all kinds of interesting, players to do computers with this wireless stuff built in and so on. And we created the Air Media Live wireless internet broadcast network. So it was called Air Media, and the device was a newscast. Hewlett Packard did their own frog design device. But for everybody else, we had this wireless pyramid, this black pyramid that had this wireless receiver in it. It would plug into, it looked like the Luxor Hotel sort of. It would plug into your computer, and you could receive broadband, narrowband, and personal cast messages. So we then had a whole data center, and we would take in information from the internet, news stories, and updates, and sports scores, and all this kind of stuff, and blow it out on wire. And so you had this wonderful channel selector on your screen, and you could pick to follow a baseball game or sports scores or news headlines, and you could do all kinds of very cool stuff. And so this product shipped, and it was a smash. It was the coolest thing you've ever seen. Got a full Walt Mossberg column. He used to be the technology editor for the Wall Street Journal, front page Walt Mossberg column in the Journal. And it won all kinds of awards and stuff. And it shipped with CompUSA, which was the biggest retailer back then, had end caps and all those kind of things. And nobody bought it, which was very depressing because it was an amazing technology. It was super cool. It was an award-winning product, dozens of awards for all kinds of stuff. It's in the Smithsonian Museum. It's in the museum. It's all, kinds of stuff. But it turned out that this was the early days of, I had a triple problem. Nobody had heard of a wireless internet news broadcast service. Nobody had heard of the internet. Nobody had heard of Irmedia, which was the name of the company. So here I had a triple lift of getting people to say, okay, well, there's this thing called the internet. And, oh, yeah, by the way, you want it wirelessly. And, oh, by the way, here's the thing to do with this company called Irmedia. So it turned out to be a total disaster, but really, amazing technology. Everybody loved.
You were too early.
But way too early.
But you had all the press,
we had tons of press. We had tons of press, and then we had, at that point, we had some major investors, including Citicorp and a bunch of other folks in there, and they said, this is the best goddamn product that nobody ever bought. And we tried all kinds of things. We tried working with stock brokerage firms and building it into paperweights so they could give it to their clients and update your stock tickers. We tried doing it with doctors and for patient compliance and news story. We tried everything you could possibly think of, wireless business cards, all kinds of stuff, and could not for a lot of money, do this. So what are we going to do? And make a very long story, well, it's already very long, I'm not going to make it short. But at that point, we said, okay, I have another idea. And this idea because now you have the internet and now you had mobile phones out there. So now, how about if we become the mobile wireless back end for the internet and is working between the internet on the one side and all of these, phone manufacturers and stuff on the other side, we can get all this data from the internet onto your phone. We'll have a whole back-end central thing. You can subscribe to multiple channels and you can have it on your phone and you can have here all this kind of very cool, basically a wireless hub to connect every wireless receiving device from cars to phones to computers to whatever on the one hand, and all the data from all the news sources and corporate things and stuff on the other hand. Amazingly brilliant plan, he says modestly.
Sorry, before this, everything you did, was it B2C or B2B? It's all B2C.
No, well, B2C. B2C. This is mostly B2B, but remember there are aspects of B2B and B2C. The data sources were sort of B2B. The actual product was B2C, right?
Got it. How do you validate whether people want this? It sounds like you had
these were all, I know about validation. These were it sounded like a really cool thing. I showed a couple people. They said, "Oh, this is really interesting." And so we did. So, but now at this point, here I had this amazing product. We spent deca millions of dollars, doing this, and and nobody's buying it. So clearly, but I had this idea for this new back-end hub, a wireless hub for the whole internet. And I had interesting players in there, and so I said, okay, we have to do a cram down. I've got to refinance it and do everybody cram down their equity, including us, and you want to re-up. And most of my I'd say, a quarter of my investors, including Citigroup, who was my biggest investor, said, okay, we'll fund this and we'll, take another shot. Right. And most of my investors said, interesting, nice, good luck with it, but we'll take our dilution and step ahead. And I had the kind of VC who gives VCs a bad name, a vulture capitalist, a really nasty, the only one in my entire career I've ever actually encountered, a really nasty little player. And they said, okay, no, pay us off in full. Do you want to cram it down? We're not going to be crammed down. Pay us. I said, no, we can't do that. Everybody's getting crammed down. And they said, we know who you are and your reputation, your family's reputation and stuff. So you won't dare file for bankruptcy protection. So you'll eat it. So no, pay us off in full. I said, that's not the way it works. And
Yeah.
besides, do you realize that the last money that got into the company was a secured note? Citigroup and I had each put in money, me personally, into the company, secured by the assets of the company. So
Yeah.
I told this little VC, you realize that if you force us into bankruptcy, you're going to give me the company, right?
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, but we don't think you're going to do it. We know who you are and your reputation and so on and so forth. You're not going to dare file for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So this is a very interesting question. I don't believe in subscribing to blackmail,
Yeah.
but this was a reputational thing. So I went and talked to the family and I said, okay, this is not, it's not a personal thing. We played it totally straight. This was a business thing. And, and they basically, we all agreed, you don't succumb to blackmail. So I went back to these guys and said, okay, a last chance. I'm not going to fold. This is, we believe in what we're doing, but it's a cram down and everybody's in, including us. And by the way, if you force us to it, I've got the company.
Yeah.
They said, you're not going to do it? I said, go, file. So they refused to do it. We filed. We did a prepackaged Chapter 11 reorganization.
Yeah.
Came out the other end. The company was owned by Citigroup and me.
Yeah.
The other guys got wiped out. And now we happen to hit the dot-com boom. So not only did we hit the dot-com boom, but 3 months after we came out of our Chapter 11 reorganization, we had started filing patents on this stuff, like 3 or 4 years previously.
Yeah.
The patents issued, and the patents were for effectively wireless internet communications onto, from computers, from the internet to community. All of a sudden, the next thing you know, Price Waterhouse, PwC values our patent portfolio at over $100 million worth of stuff. We have all kinds of investors looking at us. We have an international investment consortium come in and commit to investing $50 million, no, $25 million at a $60 million pre-money valuation, and we're off to the races. So, okay, now we're going to be a big thing. We hit the dot-com boom. It's all going up. We're well-financed. We've got this amazing technology. We've got this very, very cool. So now I recruit, and what do I know about those kind of stuff? Okay, so I recruited in as a CEO, the guy who had been like the number 2 or 3 guy at IBM, and a wonderful guy named Mark Bregman, who had come out of, he was the CTO, later CTO of Symantec and a bunch of other things. He came in, he put in cash himself, came in as the CEO. I moved myself to chairman of the board, and we went off to the races, and that's great. We did all kinds of cool stuff. Why said everybody moved into Europe. We did a deal with Richard Branson. We acquired a Branson company, so that was our base of operations in Europe. We had offices in Munich and in Paris and in London, whole London branch and stuff here and there. We had a development operation so really we had California, New York, big thing. Everything was going great. But if you do the timing of this, you'll notice that we're now just about year 1999, 2000. And what's happening in 2000, 2001? It's the dot-com crash, the end of the world. The entire universe collapses around us. So meanwhile, we had this investor consortium, this international group, have been funding us. So they had about $10 or $15 million cash into the company we were using. And 2 weeks before the closing, they call me and say, that round we're doing, not going to happen. I said, but you've already invested yourself. You put it into but you're not going to, rest of it's not going to happen. So I'm scrambling around. I volunteered at that point to close down the European, we closed down the American stuff because we actually had traction in Europe. We were selling ringtones, all kinds of stuff. But my board said, back to my father, wonderful advice, said the Native Americans in the South, when they wanted to capture alligators, what they would do is they would take a branch and they would waggle it in the water, and the alligator would see that and come up and go around, right? And grab onto it. And the alligator wouldn't let it go. So then they would just pull the branch out of the water and catch an alligator, right? And so he said, you don't want to be that alligator, right? You have to know when to let go. And in this particular case, the whole world, Amazon lost 95% of its value, right? So the whole world was crashing. So at that point, we said, okay, writing's on the wall. So we closed out, and that was a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Literally Mark and I shut the whole thing down. Went back to lick my wounds, and got wiped out by the dot-com crash. So that was the dot-com thing. No, so going from very, very high to very, very low, which was challenging. That's the first part of the story. So then I went to the dark side because the whole world of startups was non-existent then.
Wait. Before we move to the dark side, I would love to learn so much more when you're on the bright side, when you were with the Skywalkers. How was it like trying to grow the company? Like, how was it like? It sounds like a lot of it is like about the tech. Was it
Well,
hard
it was a
recruiting
lot
for
of
the tech?
about the tech, but also product management and marketing and the internet and technology. Internet was obviously brand new and technology was new.
Yeah.
It's the closest would be to what AI is today. In terms of some people living by it. I mean, every time you do everything you would do with tech on your phone, your smartphone, or your computer or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And another half the world saying internet. What's the internet? Right? It's like AI now. I don't use AI. Right? So it was that kind of adoption curve in a not quite as fast as AI, but close. And so for those who were in the universe, so back in 1995, I had helped start something called the New York New Media Association, which was all of the techies in New York. And there weren't very many of us. I mean, at that point, I think, New York, by the time the dot-com crash happened, there were about 6,000 members, right? But that was, so only 6,000, sounds like a lot, but out of 14 million people in New York, you had only 6,000 tech, right? We're part of the thing. So it was like a little campfire. We were all huddled around, in Lower Manhattan. And so that ended up being the sort of the trade association for all the dot-com groups and the folks who were associated there. So I helped to found that, and they actually had an angel investor program. And so after the crash and my world coming out around my ears, I said, well, maybe I should look at the other side. So I joined their angel program and started looking at investing in other kinds of companies. And at that point, we had people like Howard Morgan and Josh Koppelman and Rich Foreman and Esther Dyson, all big names in the early computer world over there. And so that's how I got into angel investing, and I started doing some early stage angel stuff.
Is that the dark side or still the light?
No, this was still
the bright side.
The dark side is the investing side as opposed to the bright side of entrepreneurship, right? But I became I went to the dark side, became an angel investor and started investing. But it turns out that not only am I a sixth generation entrepreneur, but I'm also, because I mentioned my great uncle David Rose, my father's uncle, whom I was named after, turned out to be one of the first angel investors in the country. He had been the angel behind the portable kidney dialysis unit, vascular stapling, hyperbaric operating chambers, desalination projects, concrete boats. He personally invented through-the-wall air conditioners. So this was a guy who didn't get out of sixth grade in school, grew up in the Lower East Side, totally self-made. And as an adult, he was very curious world traveler, and he would travel around the world finding interesting things and come back and he created the foundation for medical technology and would fund these startups in there. What was interesting is back then, now it's all cool, right? Back then, the term angel had not been applied to business stuff. It was only theatrical kinds of things. Nobody knew what he was doing. Why is he dorking around with these little teeny companies that are doing weird technology stuff, right? I found it fascinating. Everybody else found it absolutely crazy. As a matter of fact, once I came down from college for lunch with him, and I found that I loved hearing his stories, but there were 4 other people there. So I said, all right. But it turned out the other 4 were all Nobel laureates. It was me, Dave, and 4 Nobel laureates. Rosalind Yallow, Rabi Murray Gilma, incredible group. So in any event, he had been doing this angel investing. So it turns out I have a history of angel investing. In a very funny turn of events. Later on, as I was doing this angel investing, I was looking at a company from a Columbia professor, actually, who had an education kind of thing. And I thought it was very sort of interesting. I said, so how have you been funded so far? He said, well, we've been, pre-seed funded or seed funded at that point by me, the founder, by some angels, your mother. I said, your mother doesn't really count as an angel. He said, no, not your mother. I said, my mother? My mother's not an angel investor. He said, Joanna Rose. I said, wait a minute. Mom, I've got a guy here who claims you're an angel investor in his software company. She said, I'm not an angel investor. I said, I didn't think so. What's his name? There's the Professor Johnson. Oh, yeah. He had a really interesting thing, and he asked for some. So my mother even is an angel investor. So I came from, this line of angel investors, intentional or otherwise. So I had some experience there. And so when the New York New Media Program's angel group, I began to make angel investments and learn how to do it.
Yeah.
But then during the dot-com crash, remember, this was the trade association for the dot-com world. You now had 6,000 unemployed people looking for jobs from the other 6,000 people, and that didn't work.
Yeah.
So the trade association went bankrupt, and they were acquired by the Software Publishers Association, but they didn't want to have an angel group. What are you going to do with that, right? So I took the angels, kicked out everybody who wasn't actually writing checks, and reformed it as New York Angels. So I founded New York Angels. This is now like 2004, in the nuclear winter, as an angel group. So here I, was out of the company business, out of the entrepreneurial business. I was on the investor side. I was doing early stage investments. So I poured all of my entrepreneurial efforts into getting New York Angels going and starting the group. And then realized, of course, what are your tools you're using? There are no tools, but your people are setting around business plans on paper or whatever, and you're having breakfasts, and so I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I said, okay, got permission from my wife to go back into business, and said, okay, how about if I start up a new SaaS platform to back-end angel groups and make the whole process of investment easier. And so that's how I finally started Gust. So Gust was started around 2004, 2005, so 20 plus years ago, as the platform to back-end angel groups. So we went around and got all these angel groups to, instead of building their own software, they can now just use this one platform. So then you would apply for funding through, Gust for them. You go to their site. They were powered by Gust. And so then we had all of these companies that were applying. And if you're applying to New York Angels over here and, Cambridge Angels over there and Harvard Business Angels over here, why do you want to do 3 applications? Well, that didn't make any sense. So then after a year or so, we opened the other side and said, hey, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, come along here, create one profile, and then you can, like the Common App for colleges, you can then use that to apply to any angel group on the platform. So now we had a 2-sided platform, which was originally called AngelSoft, software for angel groups, right? But then eventually when we opened up the other side and it became more generic, we renamed it as Gust. And so that's how Gust got started about 20 years ago as this platform for the infrastructure of the early stage investment industry. And that way led on to way. And so that led to eventually the world's first company as a service platform. So if you're starting a company, you press a button, it's called Gust Launch. We incorporate you as a Delaware C Corp and set up your cap table and introduce you to your lawyer and do all of your post-incorporation legal, all that kind of stuff. So that's the easiest, cheapest way to start a company. Phenomenally useful. And then we had, so now we have the investors from the angel groups and these company startup founders and the companies themselves with their digital cap tables and everything else online. So how about, that actually looks like a whole ecosystem. And that was when the global financial crisis happened. And so New York City, which is the financial capital of the world, had a problem because all of the financial companies were in deep doo-doo. And so Mayor Bloomberg, who was a tech entrepreneur, at that point was in office. And so they said, well, what can we do to help turn all of these finance guys into entrepreneurs? And I said, that's not going to work, but you can help the whole early stage entrepreneurial community here, which had happened despite any public involvement in New York. And so I went down to the mayor's office. We had a discussion, and they had a site called NYC Venture Connect, which actually Columbia had been involved with, where they would provide resources for startups. And so I looked at it. I came down to the presentation and showed them that here's NYC Venture Connect, and here's its Alexa ranking, website ranking. And here is toiletpaperworld.com over here. So, toiletpaperworld.com is getting more visitors than NYC Venture Connect. You've got a problem over here. And so we suggested that they do this whole ecosystem because I had all the pieces. I had the companies and the investors and everything else on this platform. And a lot of other stuff was available from eVite and CourseHorse and, Meetup and all kinds of different tools via APIs were available for different parts of the ecosystem. So they liked that. Okay, it was a little grant to get started. And we built this whole platform as a digital ecosystem hub for New York City. The only problem was we finished it just when Bloomberg's term was over. So Bloomberg, so this is an EDC project, the Economic Development Corporation. Bloomberg leaves office and a technological, entrepreneurial capitalist was replaced as mayor by a Luddite communist. I mean, at that point, Bill de Blasio did not even own a smartphone. And seriously, had no tech policy. And he was very, very progressive and, not interested particularly in the business community. So that was the end of that. Except that de Blasio had a very smart staff team. And they looked around and they looked at all the agencies and they looked at the EDC and they said, hey, there's this whole platform that was developed over here and ready to go and never actually launched.
Yeah.
And the boss here doesn't really have a tech platform. This would be a great tech platform. So 3 months after he's inaugurated, we have a giant launch, and his tech policy is launched as digital.nyc.
Nice.
And so with Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law in Brooklyn, we did this whole big launch. You can still see it on YouTube. The entire press conference launching this was there.
Yeah.
And so this amazing platform called digital.nyc was released that had every startup and investor and group and office space and blog and video and map and a whole, it's really a killer platform. And IBM funded it, the whole thing. They were as the sponsor, and it was really, really great.
Yeah.
Coming out of Gust as the back end, powered by Gust.
Yeah.
And having that. Then around the world, people said, oh, this is a very cool thing. So when Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of England, was the mayor of London, he said, oh, we want that too. So we did Tech.London for Boris Johnson and Boston. So basically, Gust powers New York City, Digital.NYC, Tech.London, Startup Hub in Boston.
Yeah.
And so we have this. So now you have this ecosystem platform with everybody else out there, right?
Yeah.
So that was all very cool. Meanwhile, I'm investing on the side. I'm investing in all kinds of companies and startups, and I'm leading deals.
Yeah.
And there's a website called Quora, which you may be familiar with.
11,000.
Over 12,000 at this point.
Let's go.
Answers. So I've been writing since Quora started.
Yeah.
I've been writing all of these answers about anything anybody wants to ask me, and mostly startups and entrepreneurship and stuff.
Yeah.
And so Wiley, one of the biggest business book publishers in the U.S., had decided on their own that this whole startup world was moving, and angel investing was going to be an important part, but there was no book, believe it or not, no book about how to be an angel investor. To look around and see who had the biggest mouth, it was me. And they said, hey, could you write a book about how to be an angel investor? So I said, sure. So basically, again, like doing everything backwards, I got the contract, then I got an agent, and then I wrote the book instead of the other way around. So basically, I took all my Quora answers and knocked them together, did a table of contents, and turned them into a book.
Yeah.
And that was published as a book called Angel Investing, the Gust Guide to Making Money and Having Fun Investing in Startups, which turned out to be a pretty good book, and actually turned out to be a New York Times bestseller. Wow. And is now given out by most angel groups as the standard textbook to their members for how to be an angel. It's been translated into, I think, Chinese, a bunch of different places. And then, so that was fun. So now I'm published author, best-selling author, as well as prolific on Quora and running Gust. And then I got a call from Wiley saying, we just realized there are not enough angel investors out there to make a book a bestseller. So we went to see who was buying this book, and it turns out it's being bought by entrepreneurs, by founders who want to know what the angels are looking at on the other side. So can you write a book, write for founders, cut out the middleman, just write a book for founders.
Yeah.
So I said, oh, okay. And so at that point, we had just created Gust Launch on Gust as a platform to start a company. So I said, cool, let me take my core answers about how to start a company and turn that into a book as well. Yeah. So I came out with my second book called The Startup Checklist, 25 Steps to a Scalable High Growth Business, which turns out to be the first, and I found this fascinating. There were tons of books about starting, 93,000 books about starting a company, but they were all either books about how to start a small business, right? A grocery store, consulting business, whatever it is, not a startup as we think about it. Yeah. Or they were books about startups, but about high concept things, the lean startup methodology or 0 to 1, Peter Thiel, or, whatever, right?
Nothing practical.
Nothing practical. Yeah. But how do you actually file? What do you file? Who do you file? What's a business plan? How do you do it? Yeah. So I said, there's a market for that. So I actually wrote this book called The Startup Checklist, 25 Steps to a Scalable High Growth Business, and laid out step by step by step, not the big, I would point you to all the other books for stuff. What is a business plan? What is a business model canvas? Why incorporate as a Delaware C corporation? How do you do, what's a cap table? How do you, raise funding? All that kind of hands-on stuff. And it turned out that became a really big, seller too. Yeah. And after a year, Wiley comes back to me and says, hey, we just checked where this is selling. Yeah. Turns out it's being sold widely at universities. 500 universities have assigned this book as a text for their entrepreneurship programs. Wow. So I thought, that's very cool. So that became my second book. And by the way, both books, so the Startup Checklist is now about 10 years old. Yeah. Angel Investing 10 years old, and Startup Checklist is about 8. Yeah. And so then last year, Wiley came to me and said, hey, the bestsellers and times have changed. You think you should update these? And I said, yeah, the world is really moving very fast, especially in terms of AI and technology, where it's going.
Yeah.
So we've just published, 2 months ago, we published the second edition of Angel Investing,
Nice.
which is now up to date with all of the cool stuff. And it's about, and incorporates a lot of stuff about crowdfunding and safes and all those kinds of things that have happened since the book came out.
Yeah.
And then I just turned in the manuscript last month for the new version of the startup checklist.
Yes.
But there, it's really interesting because it turns out the fundamental things about the step-by-step, which most startup founders don't know, just like I didn't know when I started. How do you know what you should file, where or when or who, or where do you find an angel? What is an angel? What's an angel in a VC?
Yeah.
Nobody knows it off the top of your head, right?
Yeah.
So that stuff is all standard. But the actual thing about, well, what tools do I use for this? Where I had a lot of point to's and URLs in the first book about pointing you to platforms and stuff.
Yeah.
The world is now moving so fast and AI is so integrated that, first of all, if you're building a company today, you have to be building it on AI.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? And so I realized that while the chapter structure was almost identical, needed very, very few changes, but what you're doing, the how you're doing it was exactly the opposite. It was changing so fast that anything I would put in would be completely out of it. So I went to Wiley and I said, okay, we're going to do a new kind of book. I am going to include QR codes in the book in every chapter, and I'm going to reference the QR codes. And so the book will be effectively an evergreen, timeless book. It'll have all of the important stuff in the book, which are about the steps and so on. And then if you want to know what's the latest AI platform I should use for doing market analysis, whatever it is, just click this QR code, and then we will maintain a website online with all of the up to the minute, latest, greatest, LLMs and startup platforms and so on and so forth. Yeah. So that's coming out now. That'll be out this spring.
That'll be cool.
I think they're aiming for an April publication for that.
Yeah.
And so
that's for startups or angel investors?
No, that's for startups. That's the startup checklist, right? So the angel investors, new one is out for angels. It's called Angel Investing Second Edition.
Yes.
And the second edition of Startup Checklist is coming out this spring.
Got it. Nice. So it sounds like there's 3 phases, and of course, 1,000 micro phases throughout your career. But the big 3 was your first startup in 1980s to the .com, and then the second one is the US Angels. And now I heard that you're building.
There's a third one, yes, because now I bring the whole thing back together again. Because now, so here we are with this platform for startups and angels and digital companies. I had I had the ecosystem. So I had all the pieces here. Yeah. And so the next logical extension to that is really a capital markets platform. Since I had the investors and I had the companies and I had their cap tables online, right? That would be an interesting, logical marketplace play to let people buy and sell their shares, right? Yeah. Carta, which did cap tables, had the same idea with a platform that they were going to do a marketplace there, right? Yeah. It turns out, in retrospect, that nobody wants to buy and sell shares of startups before they're very, very rich. So that early stage world, that really market was more illusory than not, didn't really exist. But it was when we started doing this, it was about 5 years ago. The logical play was blockchain. And so you would build a whole thing on blockchain. So we figured out how to do it, came up with the whole plan, went around to get some funding for it, to finance for it. And one of the first family offices we were talking to about this said, it's an interesting platform, but we don't really invest in startup companies. We do invest in real estate. We have a big real estate portfolio. Could this platform be used for real estate? As you recall, back at the beginning of our conversation, I have a little bit of background in real estate. So I said,
4 generations.
I hadn't thought about real estate, but now that you mention it, this could actually could be used for that. Yeah. So we gave a little thought to it, figured out that the big problem in real estate was liquidity, the ability to buy and sell existing shares of existing buildings, not future startup companies, but buildings. And so I said, okay, great. So we pivoted and said, forget a platform for startup companies, we'll make it a platform for real estate. And then because investing big money in real estate is not the same as investing angel dollars in startups, they're really 2 different universes. We spun it out of Gust as a standalone company. It's called US REM, the US real estate market, which implies that there will be other international ones out there in the future. But for now, it's the US real estate market, and it's designed as a liquidity platform effectively for the big investors who invest in real estate and private real estate. If you want to invest as a regular retail investor in real estate, there are publicly traded REITs that you can invest in, real estate investment trusts. They trade in the stock market. Invest $100, not a problem. But there is $2 trillion of money, private money, which is where all the rich people invest in real estate. As a matter of fact, private real estate, privately owned, professionally managed real estate is the number one allocation of most major family offices into an asset class, even more so than private equity or public equities or hedge funds, whatever it is, because it's a long-term solid asset class, right? And so these typical investments from these limited partners or LPs are, in the hundreds of thousands to tens of millions, per fund or per, property in real estate. But because real estate's a long-term asset class, the investments have to be long-term to match that. And therefore, when you invest in a real estate syndicate or a real estate fund, the idea is it's a long-term fund. It is, 5, 7, 10, 12 years that your money is in. And if it goes in, it doesn't come out until the property is sold at the end. Now, along the way, you get distributions from the rent, from the rents and the cash flow. So it provides a current return, but the big economic return comes from the property is sold, the IRR, when the property is sold at the back end. Before then, you're sort of stuck. But what happens? So people know that going in, right? Because it's a long-term play. You have a lot of cash. You put some of it in this solid, not going anywhere asset. But what happens if unexpectedly you have a need for cash? Which in the U.S. means you're getting divorced. All of a sudden, you got to divide your assets, or you die and your estate has to deal with it, or you have a capital call from somebody else and you need to come up with the cash, or you want to rebalance. You're a fund and you want to rebalance your holding. You can't do it, right? So you go to the GP, the general partner, and you say, "Hey, I'd like to, get out of this. Can you please buy me out?" And the GP's response is, "I empathize, but no, that's not the way it works." And so if the LP makes enough of a mistake, the GP will eventually say, "Okay, listen, if you can find somebody to, step into your shoes who I approve of, I'll let you do that. You can sell it. I don't have to let you do that, but I'm willing to let you do that, just to make you happy," right? And so then you're left with a random person with a random piece of a random real estate syndicate or fund trying to find a buyer for it. And that's fine if you have a, $150 million, $200 million portfolio pieces. There are secondary funds, large secondary funds from Blackstone and areas and elsewhere that'll buy those pieces. But if you're a typical smaller investor, smaller with a $1 million piece or a $250,000 piece, there is nobody who's going to buy that. Good luck on finding anybody to buy that. So in those cases, if you're really desperate to sell, it's like a back alley kind of a thing. You call your friend who knows a friend, or your lawyer knows somebody, and they find somebody who will come in and look at it. And typically, if you can sell it, and that's a very big if, it'll be at a discount of 30, 40, 50% to the value of the asset, because they can't further resell it. It's, and they know you're distressed. So that's a real challenge. So that's a problem in the industry. And given the fact that it's a $2 trillion market, that's a big thing. So we said, well, okay, how about if you had a market that was somewhat more efficient, because you have buyers and sellers? It's not efficient, not a technical efficiency thing when you do nanosecond trading and whatever. It's just there's no place where you can bring together the buyers and sellers, right? And on top of that, because all of the sales require pre-approval by the GP, right, to let the LPs sign, you got to involve the GPs. So, and then the problem is, for people, and people have been trying this for 10, 15 years. There were 30 or 40 attempts at doing marketplaces for fractional real estate. They were blockchain stuff. They were crowdfunding things. None of them worked. They all failed because they were either trying to democratize real estate capital investment. Let the little guy invest like Donald Trump, right? So you can make $1 zillion investing your $100 into real estate. It doesn't work that way. Real estate, long-term, illiquid real estate is not a place for short-term small investments. A typical, all of these deals typically will have a very few partners in them with big investments. The idea of a tiny stuff, the GPs, general partners, don't want lots of little people with, but it's a complete mismatch, right? And it turns out that if you want to, as a retail investor, invest in real estate, you can invest in a publicly traded REIT. Go to the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, and you can invest in a REIT. No problem. That's fine. But if you want to invest in private real estate, which is this whole other beast, it doesn't work for crowdfunding. So anybody who was looking at it from that approach, that failed. Then you had all the blockchain folks saying, "Oh, the problem here is that we can do things more efficiently with blockchain, and it can rapidly trade and it can, turns out that people don't care if you're putting $10 million into a real estate deal, whether you close in 2 hours, 2 weeks, 2 days, or 2 months is irrelevant, right? So it's not an efficiency question over there. You're dealing with a very few, not a mass market thing. It's a totally regulated environment. It's security sales, so SEC regulated, and everybody has to know that you're qualified, you're exempt from SEC regulations, and your background. They want to know who was on their cap table, and so therefore you're not going to be trading tokens that nobody knows who owns them and where they're going on other kinds of exchanges. And so for all kinds of reasons, that whole universe was solving a problem that didn't exist. And there were a couple of people who got halfway there. And they said, okay, the problem is secondary liquidity for LPs. And so we'll create a marketplace where they can bring their things and sell them. But the problem with that one, halfway there, was that what they ended up having is a site only of these mismatched, individual pieces, 100,000 of this here and 250 of that there and something else, right? Where you had to get permission in every case from the GP to go do it. And anybody coming in wouldn't know what was available. You had a chance to buy this one piece of whatever, right? Turned out that didn't work. So what we are doing is we have created this platform. It is a marketplace. It's a registered ATS, alternative trading system, where we start with the sponsor. We start with the GP. And we say, okay, if you effectively list your property with us, it doesn't cost you anything. What you're basically saying is you're telling your LPs that if they want to trade, they can on this platform, right? And it doesn't cost the GP anything. So what this does, it turns out that there is something called the liquidity premium for real estate. There have been several studies showing that for a piece of real estate, if it's liquid and you can resell it, it's worth more than if you can't. Duh, that's obvious, right? If you can do something, can do something, it's worth more. Turns out that the calculated value of that is between 12 and 22%, with an average of 16% of a liquidity premium, the difference between liquid and non-liquid. So therefore, when we go to these GPs, we say, if you can provide liquidity on your asset, you've just increased the value of this into your pocket. So we're finding remarkable adoption by GPs who have these things, want to allow liquidity there. And so what happens is, and so then they say, well, as long as I'm doing that, I'm raising a new fund. Can I put my new fund on your platform, effectively like an IPO, right? Can I raise capital? And we said, okay, we don't have a giant market yet, but sure, if we put it on it, as long as it can be traded secondarily in the future after you do it. So they said, fine. So now, if you're looking to raise funds for your initial, fund or syndicate, you put it on there. Buyers can come in and see that they can invest at whatever number you're offering it at. And that's fine. And you can raise funds as a GP, however you're regularly raising them through a placement agent or your own network or whatever. And if we bring in additional, capital, that's great. We're a broker dealer, so we get a commission on it. That's fine. Same sort of industry standard commissions. And everything's normal, no problem. But for us, the real fun comes after they finish that initial sale. After the primary sale is done, they've got the whole fund or syndicate sold, put together. They bought the property, and now the developer and sponsor is off to doing other things and so on and so forth. Now that we go with the sponsor together, and they introduce us to all of their LPs who have just bought into this syndicate, or if they're giving us an existing one, just all the LPs in the syndicate. And they introduce us and say, hey, here's a platform for this. We'll have only one question for you. Andrew, you just, invested $250,000 into this thing. We're glad you're in it for the long term. And as you know, it'll probably be 5 or 10 years to do this. But if, tomorrow morning someone were to come along and offer to acquire your piece for that, above what number might you be interested in entertaining an offer, right? So you put in 250. Somebody offers you $50,000. You don't want to hear about it. I won't bother you, right? Somebody offers you $1 million. You put in 250. My assumption is, thank you very much. You want to hear about it, and you'll do that, right? So therefore, everybody, all the LPs, just give us that number, effectively above which they want to receive offers. And so having done that, we say, great. Now don't forget about it. We don't exist, right? And they go off and do their business, and now it's a regular fund just sitting there, except that now we have a permanent listing for this property with all the information provided by the GP, updated annual reports, quarterly reports, so on and so forth, available under NDA that they sign with the GP. And behind the scenes, I effectively have the whole cap table and know exactly what each piece is willing to sell for, right? That's not published. There's no quoted price. This isn't a price discovery vehicle, but now it's there. So now somebody comes along, looks, and to get onto our site, you have to be a qualified purchaser, which means you have to be managing over $5 million in investments. And this is not for mass affluent. This is a very high level thing. But if you're interested in allocating to real estate, you can come in and you can see all the offerings, primaries and secondaries. It doesn't matter. Just like on the New York Stock Exchange, whether it's an IPO or existing one, you're still invested in. And so you say, okay, well, this is interesting. Let's say for a new property, I like to invest this amount. Great, we introduce you to the GP, you do the deal, you're on the cap table. But if it's one that's already been finished, then you say, oh, I'd like to invest, X amount at this valuation.
Yeah.
We then go out, the platform goes out automatically at the back end,
Yeah.
looks at all of the, says, who wants to be notified at an equivalent price, for this there.
Yeah.
And we say, hey, there's an offer to acquire, some, all of your interest, whatever it is at this number. Are you interested? And if the answer is yes, we then do a double blind transaction. We close it in escrow.
Yeah.
Neither the buyer nor the seller know who the other one is. It goes to the GP. The GP signs off, which they've agreed to do. And now the new player steps into the shoes of the old player on the cap table. And so what you now have is a permanent market. The buyers and sellers, whether they were a first-time buyer in the primary market or a secondary buyer, know that they can turn around and sell it on our platform at any time just by changing the price.
I see.
And so having done that, we then had a very interesting wrinkle that I hadn't expected. We got an introduction to a group called Liquid LP. And what they do, they're a relatively new fund. They lend money against illiquid assets, particularly typically VC and PE investments, right? Which if you're a CEO of a long-term, you can't sell it, but you can borrow against it. Yeah. So they said, we'd love to get into real estate, but real estate is so complicated. It's so one-off. We got to get the approval of everybody in there. I said, we might have an answer. They looked at what we were doing and they said, wait a minute, are you telling me that you have a platform where you have all the information on the property, you have the GP's pre-approval for sales of the properties, you have access to all of the LPs and know how much they invest in? They said, okay, that's great. We will underwrite every property on your platform that's in secondary mode. And so then we will be prepared to offer to lend. It's a signature loan, but it's backed up by the asset. We will have the offer to lend X amount of money to every LP on your platform based on their holdings. So now every LP on the platform has a little dashboard, a little portfolio saying, here's the property your interest you own. Here's how much of the interest you own. Here's its current NAV, net asset value. Here's what you paid for it. At what number do you want to receive buy offers to buy you out? Are you interested in buying more? Let me know. Tell me what you're prepared to pay. And oh, by the way, if you want to borrow, you have to click right here, and you can borrow up to $220,000 or whatever about that, and that starts off the process there. So whether you're buying, selling, borrowing, we've now provided liquidity for this real estate with the approval of the GP, and LPs are happy, GPs are happy, everybody's happy, and hopefully this is the new way to a real estate market.
Yeah, that is wonderful. It sounds like you've moved on from building cool B2C hard tech where people, are chasing after. Then you build like a community, and now like the continuation of a community, which is a marketplace. Yeah. What learnings have you gotten from like these three phases? Like, why did you go from building this cool thing to like a marketplace?
Well, I think the evolution, as I've described it, is relatively, rational and reasonable. The interesting question are the learnings, right? So as you can tell, I'm ebullient. I'm still a founder. I think like a founder. More like I'm known as an investor, but I really think of myself as a founder. Just like Benjamin Franklin, who was a statesman and everything else, inventor. He wrote his own tombstone and said, "Here lies Benjamin Franklin, printer." He thought of himself as a businessman, as a printer. And I think of myself as a printer also, but as an entrepreneur. And so I am still wildly optimistic and energetic and believe in the futures and that's why I do startups. But if they've learned anything over time, it's a little reality testing in the way the world was. Everything always takes longer than you expect. Everything always costs more than you expect. Even if something seems absolutely brilliant to you, A, it won't necessarily seem brilliant to everybody else. And B, even if it is brilliant, it won't always work because sometimes just luck happens or bad things or whatever, right? Who knew the internet was going to crash when it did? Who knew the global financial crisis was going to come along, right? And then looking at it from the other side, from the investor. So when I was raising funds as a first-time entrepreneur, I was convinced, as many founders are today, that it was all personal. Do you not like me? Are you prejudiced against me for some reason? Color of my skin, my ethnic background, my religious background, whatever it is. Are you maybe that I'm a fast talker? So it's very, entrepreneurs tend to personalize everything, right? But in reality, on the investing side, I've been there now for a quarter of a century and written the textbooks on it. It's not that. It's actually very, very little that has to do with you personally.
Mm.
They couldn't care about you. If you're going to an arm's length, I mean, if you go to your brother for money, then that's another thing. But if you go to an arm's length investor, they don't have any preconceived notion about you. They don't dislike you or like you. They're looking at you as an investment opportunity, right? And you can come on like an insufferable jerk, or you can come in like a real sweetie pie, but they're looking at a business investment opportunity. And I would tell you that a number of the people in whom I've invested, the best founders, they can be on the spectrum, they can be abrasive, they can be, not people I would want to be best friends with, but people who I can recognize are really good. Now, that doesn't mean you're investing in bad people. The number one thing for me is integrity, right? And I've said that time immemorial. If I get the slightest whiff that somebody isn't playing straight with me, then that's out, right? So you got to be. But if you're playing straight and you just happen to be on the spectrum, or you just happen to be a jerk, there are jerks. Some jerk. Steve Jobs was a jerk. There are Elon Musk. So basically, you can be a jerk, but you can be a great entrepreneur. And as long as you're honest, right? As long as you're honest about it, that's the most important thing. That's personality is different from integrity, right? And so among the things I've always known about integrity, and that's always been my primary thing. I will double down on that now in my old age. This is really critical, integrity. But beyond that, it's business. It really is just business, right? And so therefore, if entrepreneurs tend to personalize everything, and they tend to come up with new ways of doing things. And so what I've learned is integrity is key. You want a founder who you can look at and realize this person has what it takes to get it going, right? And whether it's a combination, I've talked about that at Columbia and elsewise and I've got various things online. A TED Talk had 2 million views that I did about how to pitch a VC. You're looking at things like passion and commitment and domain expertise, and integrity being the first, and everything else, following in there. But then it's a rational question. And so the structure, and that's why I wrote the startup checklist. The startup checklist is all about how do I start a company? But what do I do? How do I incorporate? Where do I go? What's this? Right? And that's something that nobody ever tells you unless you go out and research it, right? Bedtime stories, even my guess were, I wasn't told, you file a series, file a Form D and everything, So instead, that's what this book does, right? And it turns out that as an investor, I would love to make a decision according to my thesis, whatever my investing thesis is, on companies that I think are the right combination of founder, market, product, and so on and so forth, right? I don't want to have to wrestle with everything else. So if you come into me with something that's an oddball, whatever, I've got a special 2-class share structure with the founder's share and this and that, Mark Zuckerberg could do it. Why can't I? No, you're not Mark Zuckerberg, so no, you can't do that, right? And so one of the things that I found, one of my current dictums, is that every standard deviation from the mean, right? Call it, 15% deviation off of what is absolutely normal, makes it twice as hard to raise funds. So, for example, if a Delaware C corp is the universal standard for what people are doing, and you want to follow Elon Musk and incorporate in Texas for no reason other than you're following Elon Musk, right? All right, now you're a Texas thing. Is it going to ruin the company? No. But will it make it twice as hard to fund? Order of magnitude. Because somebody can say, why are you into whatever? You have 2 founders, 2 classes of shares that give you anti-dilution rights, and no. I just want a standard thing. We'll do it on a convertible note or a safe or a Series A, Series C. But no, nothing. And if you end up being something, where I've got my patents held at a different structure that I own and licensed back, and I'm incorporated in Nevada, and I'm doing it here, you've just set up so many bars. You're so non-standard, right? That even if the company makes sense, investors aren't going to look at it, right? So therefore, try and do unless it's key, critical to your business, right? Try and do what everybody else is doing, what investors expect, because then it's just a checkbox, right? And then they can focus on the things that differentiate you. And so the more I go through this, the more I realize that, I have 20 plus years, 40 years now of experience in understanding how this market works. And as an investor and an angel who does this all the time, in my sleep, I know what's normal, what's not normal, how it can work. Somebody is a first-time founder starting out, has no clue. You have no guidance, right? Unless you do things like read my book, you're not going to, have a feel for it.
Should read your book.
So hey, read my book, right? But more than that, watch the video. I did a video. It's on YouTube now, and I'm probably going to update it just to freshen it up, this year, which is called Fundraising 101. So Fundraising 101 with David S. Rose. You can search, Fundraising 101, David S. Rose, Gust, or whatever. It's about an hour webinar that I did where I walk through what the whole market looks like, what the whole thesis looks like. How do you fundraise, right? Nobody was born knowing what an angel is or a VC or where to find them or what they're looking for or how you do that, or right. And so this dispels some myths like, there's no magic word. You can't sprinkle AI and somehow they're gonna do it. Investors don't invest in ideas, no matter how good your idea is. They don't invest in ideas. There are too many ideas. They invest in companies, in actual companies that have real traction, right? So what are investors looking for? How do you find them? What's the difference between an angel and a VC? What's the difference between a pre-seed round and a seed round and a Series A? Well, all of these various things. And once you watch that video, literally it's an hour free video, watch it, and it will give people the context into which to put their entire fundraising operation. And then there's a whole lot of stuff in the book and beyond that we can deal with. So that if there's one thing I've learned, it's not personal, right? Other than the integrity issue, it's not personal, and you want to be standard. And then beyond that, you do all the other things that you hear about, right? You, in this day and age, 2026, you want to be an exponential organization. You better be embracing exponential technology, AI, and everything else, and business structures, whether it's outsourcing or, all kinds of stuff. There's a great book called The Exponential Organization by Peter Diamandis and Celine Ismail, friends of mine who were, associate founder of Singularity University, which is all about the future. And so this is about how to structure an organization designed for the future. When the book actually quotes me from my early days of Singularity University in saying that any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st. Because the world has changed so dramatically in the last quarter century that literally, if you had a company that was ideally designed for the world of the late 20th century, right? Even an Amazon or whatever, or an Apple selling, hardware, it will fail today because the world is so different, which is why, Amazon is a data, science company, and Apple is doing AI and whatever, right? So you have to reimagine and rethink your company in this era of AI and tech. And that's a good book to help you get there.
Yeah. And curious what you would have to say for founders who are starting today when it comes to what they should build. Because you were there at the beginning of tech. You saw how people would start building new things and then people would be late to catch on. So you built the best product, but do understand.
Listen, you can never time it. So first of all, people say, well, what's hot now? What should I be doing? It has nothing to do with being hot, right? Just as in the, so if I had 20 years ago told you, Andrew, I tell you, the big secret is taxi dispatch software. You'd look at me like I had three heads. Taxi dispatch software? That's what I should be spending my time on? Well, Uber IPO for $84 billion, right? Oh, no, I was wrong. It's not that. It's actually renting out your spare bedroom. Renting out my spare bedroom? What are you talking about? Oh, well, if we can take everybody and make them a hotelier, right, with Airbnb, hello, that's a big kind of thing, right? And so at any time, the world is moving so fast and changing so fast that literally everything's up for grabs. When I said that any company had done in the 20th century, that means literally any company that was built in the 20th century for the market, that no matter how successful, is doomed to failure right now unless they change. And so therefore you come in and do it, right? So, travel agencies, right, have been around for, 100 years. Big travel agents, so on and so forth, right? But along comes Expedia or whatever, and Booking.com that now are an online travel agent where they have links to all these guys and they can do that. That's great, right? But you know what? They were designed for the late end of the 20th century. And they're going to get their lunch eaten as well unless they change and pivot. So I happen to be the chairman of the board of an AI-based travel company, which is doing amazing stuff with travel, but it's all AI-based. Ultimately, it'll be a headless thing. If you are a VC, hello, it's all going to be there's something called Boardy, which if you haven't seen it or people haven't seen it, it's effectively a completely AI entity that is matching people up, figuring out what to invest in, and they've got, for their seed round, they had $200 million worth of commitments for their seed round at a $300 million valuation, which sounds insane, but I think that's actually worth it. I mean, they are going to be a really interesting company, right? And so therefore, there's no one hot thing. Anything there where you have a domain expertise in it and you see that there's a problem, right? I mean, it could be how to install tile on a wall, right? I tell you, there are people who are doing it. I've seen drywall robotics installers that are absolutely amazing. I mean, it turns out that right now, if you go build a building in construction, remember, I'm out of the field of prop tech. If you build a building and you install drywall, the way it works is you take sheet, and by the way, sheetrock itself, drywall is in my lifetime. The building that I live in our firm built in 1972 has lath and plaster walls. It was the last lath and plaster building in the city. But basically, until the mid 20th century, you have put up lath and you plaster the whole wall on a thing. Now everything 100% is drywall, sheetrock, done in a factory, chipped to the side, put up on a wall, right? But the way that's put up, you put up the framing for it, then you take your drywall, your sheetrock, and you put it on, you screw it in. And then you have to, tape, and you put mud, which is a spackling compound, on the thing, and then you sand it, then you put another coat, and then you sand it, and then you got to sand the whole, you skim coat the whole wall, and you sand that, and it takes a day or two for it to set each time. So basically, it's a 7-day process to, put up a new wall, because you have to do it, and it's very human intermediate. You got to screw it in and shoot the guns and tape it and so forth. I will tell you, you can now, if you have the guy come in and put the whole wall up and then go away. And then instead of spending, 5 to 7 days with 3 coats of taping and spackling and sanding, so on and so forth, you come in with a robot. The robot can come in and it can look at the wall, sees where it is, measure things, can spray out complete, compound across the entire thing to an absolute micrometer finish over here. And in one fell swoop, do your entire wall perfectly, better than any human could actually do. And it can do it in one pass and just save you 3 or 4 days on your drywall, right? I mean, that's to here and now. I've got friends who are building completely automated building things, and we're talking modular building in a factory where you have workmen putting up a house and then putting it on a truck and building out. I'm talking about either, building an entire building and flat packing it out of IKEA and coming out and then going, flip, 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 flip. You assemble an entire thing literally in a few days out of pre-made robotic parts. There's a great company called Gropius in Europe that's doing that. And then in our first class at Singularity University, came up with the idea of literally computer building 3D printing houses. Effectively, you take a gantry and then it's run just like a 3D printer, and you feed it concrete instead of filament. And the next thing you know, you put your thing and it goes,
I've seen that.
and there's your building, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about construction, whether you're talking about how to manufacture tables or how to cook, food. Everything now is literally up for grabs, right? And so the decision on what things should be built has nothing to do with industry. Don't worry about anything because you read something as a hot area. By the time you start doing it, it'll be yesterday's news, right? Instead, think about something that you are doing right now where there's a problem, where there's a challenge, where something can be done better, faster, and cheaper, and then apply all of this new technology and new thought processes to doing that.
So just keep innovating. And as long as you make it cheaper, faster, better,
someone
will pay for it.
The bottom line is 10x. If you can, in an idea where you want to be 10x cheaper and 10x faster and 10x better, right? But I'll take any one 10x. You give me 10x of any of those 3, and you've got a shot at actually getting funded, right? Because you are dealing with this old 20th century world, and this is the new world. So everything, including Techie's dispatch software and everything else, right, is up for grabs now.
And speaking of investing, you said don't take it personally, and it said it's fundamentally about the investor's thesis. By that logic, is it just a numbers game?
No, it's not. It's not purely a numbers game. It's more of a numbers game than I would have thought, right? In my early career. But the numbers are actually indicative of a story behind the numbers, right? So the business has to be scalable. So, for example, I mentioned my hobby is letterpress printing, like the Johann Gutenberg, setting type by hand and printing on old-fashioned printing presses.
My family was a printing press.
Oh, cool.
So my mom grew up like assembling those.
Right. Okay, so that's what I do as a hobby. I have printing presses and I have type and everything else, right? And so I've always wanted to create a website, a letterpress luxuries website with the coolest in sort of new old stock technology, the best of the, I would love to do that. That'd be a lot of fun. I would love to go shopping there for my own stuff. that is not a business that is going to be a big scalable business, right? It's not exactly, so it might be a lovely business that I would like to be a client of. I might like to do it, but that's not a business anybody would ever invest in, right? And so therefore, I mean, a restaurant, restaurants are, I love eating in restaurants, but they are even, as my wife says, running a restaurant is the only thing scarier than running a startup, right? Because it's, even an investor money, you're not going to make money on it, right? It's not a third party investment. So dollars come. So the fact that I wouldn't invest in a restaurant, right? It's not an emotional play. It's ultimately comes down to a dollars and cents kind of play, right? And so therefore, for a founder who may be, a jerk, if that founder, as long as they're honest, which is the most important thing, if they can be a jerk, but if they're an effective jerk, and if they've shown that they can actually pull the pieces together and make something happen, that's okay. So it comes to, and so therefore the things you're looking at is the business scalable, right? Can it potentially grow? And that's one of the things that most people don't really understand, that when you're a first-time founder, scalability is so important to investors, because the economics of the startup industry are you're putting in a little bit of money now into a lot of deals, and most of them, the vast majority, are going to fail completely. Your money's going to get wiped, which means that the only way you make not only your money back, but enough money to justify the incredibly high risk of all the other things over there is if you have an incredibly high return, right? Which means it's got to be a really big business. And since you're not building a nuclear power plant with my angel money over here, right? It's not being big out of the box. It's going to be something that's going to start small, prove that you can do it, get it started, get some traction, and then doing that same thing more and more and more and more. It should scale up and get to be very, very big, right? So Amazon, sold its first book online. I mean, the way they did, they had no stock, they had no warehouse, they had nothing. What they would do is you would order a book, and they would go order from the publisher, and they would send it to you, right? So that's how they became the world's biggest bookstore, because they had the whole catalog of all the books published, and they say, "Great, you order it, I'll go find it, right, and then and bring it in." And so that's an inherently scalable business. If I told you to create a business right now to sell my books, you could do it. You could create an online website to do that, but the time it would take you, just your time alone, to create a website, even with a free tool, would be more than the cost of my book, right? You would lose money on it. If I tell Jeff Bezos to create a website to sell my book, the marginal cost for Amazon to sell my book is effectively zero, right? And so you want a business that is really, really scalable. And so, if I have a founder who I trust, that's the integrity question, who I think has what it takes in terms of a track record, or can prove to me somehow that they have the energy and the commitment and the stick-to-itiveness and the rationality and the pragmatism and all the kind of thing, and they're passionate about the business they're building, right? Okay, that's good. And then the third thing that is something I used to totally discount, and now as an angel with many, many years on the table, I say is almost the most important. Not important, it's more important than the other two, but it's almost as important. And that's the traction question, right? I used to think it's a great idea. No, sorry. There are a million great ideas. Great ideas don't cut it. Angels and VCs do not invest in ideas. What we invest in is companies, right? And a company to execute on this idea. It's all about, so Derek Sivers, who is a really smart guy.
I follow him. His writings are great.
Derek Sivers is a brilliant guy. He did a TED talk about the most important person is the first follower, not the founder. It's the person who does that. And there's a wonderful illustration of guys dancing on a hilltop and stuff, which is a great video. See if you can find it. It's a wonderful thing. But he wrote a blog post saying it was all about being asked to sign NDAs by founders as an angel. And he said, that's so ridiculous. I'm going to, I'm being asked to sign an NDA for an idea. I don't invest in ideas aren't important. It's execution. And he did a quick analysis of a chart, basically saying that ideas are worth nothing. The money is with execution. And, not good execution is worth zero. Good execution is worth, 10x. Great execution is worth 100x. Phenomenal execution is worth, 1,000x, right? And so the only question is the idea is a multiplier on the execution. A bad idea is like -1. A good idea is 0. A good idea is 1. A great idea is 10. A phenomenal idea is 100, right? And you multiply those two to figure out what the value of the operation is. It's a great post. I included it in my book, and I reference it all the time online. But the essence there is, I don't care about the idea. I only care about the idea relative to can you execute, right? If somebody had said taxi dispatch software, well, okay, you said, okay, let people get taxis on your phone. It still wouldn't have, right? But it's the whole thought process of what does that mean long term, right? And so if you think about the idea of autonomous vehicles, I mean, where this is going, what effectively what Uber did was to create a platform that enabled anybody to be the world's best chauffeur. I mean, what do you want from a great chauffeur? You want to have a clean car, somebody who shows up on time, where you want to be, knows exactly where you want to go, takes you there the fastest route, right? Will be there to pick you up when you leave.
Doesn't harass you.
It doesn't harass you. The car doesn't smell bad, right? It automatically magically builds your credit card, right? That's what you, in an ideal chauffeur, if you created, that's what you would have a robot chauffeur do. Okay, what they did was they did a platform that turned everybody, including an immigrant, off the boat who doesn't speak English, just follow a thing to make you the world's best chauffeur. And they built a $100 billion company on top of that, right? Except that what they could do to people now with AI, which was not the case 20 years ago, you replace that with an autonomous vehicle. Every single thing about their entire infrastructure they have built applies now to autonomous vehicles and not people. It can turn an autonomous vehicle into the best chauffeur out there with the same things: automatic billing, automatic routing, running here, right? And so and so you're going to see a lot of changes. And so I would say that it's not an idea per se. Find a problem that exists. And today I would say that any problem you can find can be solved better by technology, right? Technology is now at a point, the combination of AI and eventually robotics and everything else, all kinds of machine systems can literally do virtually anything at this point, at least as well as a typical human, if not better. And so you'll be using AI to do that. And whether it's travel or whether manufacturing or whether it's design or entertainment or whatever it is, right? Everything is now fair game. So find something that you know about, that you're interested in solving a problem with, where there is a problem that you believe needs to be solved, then validate that it is indeed a problem, that other people have the problem, then validate that you're willing to pay for a solution. So for example, in the startup checklist, in the introduction, because a lot of entrepreneurs don't read a whole lot of stuff out there. So it's a 27 chapter book, but the introduction, I took the whole thing down to a very long core answer, right? Of literally, I think 26 or 70 points in the introduction. Boom, 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 boom. So if you do nothing else, just read the introduction and then go start your company, right? So
I see. And one thing, now that AI has made it so easy to build anything, so easy to build software, I think the biggest question, I fully agree on the idea part. Now the second question is on execution, and not just on execution, but on competition. Anyone can build any software going forward. How do you stand out? If a VC or an investor asks you, why you? Why not these 10 other people who came to me?
Because the answer is it's not tech, right? You will have the guys who did AI 2027, which is this analysis scenario play of the future of technology, are now saying that within 5 years, you will have superhuman coders beyond anything any human can do. So it will not be that. I mean, I just got started with vibe coding. I mean, I haven't coded anything since I was 15 or whatever, right? 20. But vibe coding, unbelievable. I've created an entire, complete, full-on, multifaceted operating site, the whole thing. And so if I can do that, because I'm a good technologist and I know my domain and I know, enough about how to use programs. I'm not a coder, but that level of skill, which a lot of people have, can be used to instantiate what you have in mind. So the idea of a technical co-founder is an interesting, where that's going will be made to be seen, right? So
I see. Makes sense. This has been great. Any parting words for our audience?
No, so you got to have passion and believe in what you're doing, right? If you are not passionate about creating a business, not necessarily just a product, you can be passionate about a product but not the business, then you got to find somebody who is passionate about the business as a co-founder there, right? So be passionate about the business you're building and be prepared to just bullet through, because it will always cost more, take longer, be more painful than you can imagine. But at the same time, you have to have a sense of rationality, right? As Mark Twain once said, if 3 people tell you you're drunk, go and lie down anyway, right? So basically, if 3 people who should know better tell you that the idea you have isn't going to work for reasons X, Y, or Z, take a good look before you go jumping and putting all your resources behind them, right? So you got to have this very interesting thing about passion and commitment on the one hand, but pragmatism on the other hand. And make sure before you enter into this sphere that you know what you're doing. Watch the video about Fundraising 101, read the book, pick up all of the mentoring, scale mentoring. You can read everybody's books on this subject, go to events in your city, go to accelerators, learn these things.
Mm.
And that will give you the context within which you can then operate and express your passion in creating a business.
Those are very helpful. Well, thank you so much for the very fascinating story of like tech from 0 to 1 and today and going forward, but also super excited to see someone who's like continuously in the game from like
That's
day
the goal.
0 until now.
That's the goal.
Thank you so much for
My
coming.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.